The thing with VR is when we made our first VR film, we didn't know how audiences were going to react. And we've had a really positive response from audiences. And I think that's because it changes people's preconceptions of what an orchestra is. So if you've never seen an orchestra before, you often think it's really boring and really flat and formal. But actually in VR, you realize how unified they are and how hard they're all working and how they're all communicating all the time. But we still found VR was quite isolating with headphones. It's not a group experience. But when you all watch it together with a big bunch of speakers, it's really loud and it's really physical, and you feel the ground move when it's playing at its full strength. And I think that changes the whole experience.
Yeah, that's fine.
Not much,
Okay,
but...
Our second film, Beethoven's Fifth, which we premiered last year and took to South by Southwest in March, was directed by Google's principal VR filmmaker, Jessica Brillhart. So it's a really interesting, much more artistic, kinetic interpretation of the orchestra performing. And the music's very different, so it's Beethoven's Fifth, the first movement, which everybody knows. And you jump positions in the orchestra. So I think she directed it in a different way as her own artistic response to the orchestra, but also to the story of the Golden Record, which the film was inspired by, which I can talk about a bit more in detail if you want. It's a pretty amazing story. Beethoven's Fifth was actually made last year as a response to NASA's project called the Golden Record. Basically, it was the 40th anniversary last year, and in 1977 NASA launched two spacecraft, Voyager 1 and Voyager 2, into space, and for the first time they'd worked out how to slingshot around planets to go really into the farthest reaches of the solar system, and for the first time they realized they were going to send a spaceship out of our solar system. And they realized it would travel for 40,000 years before it reached the first star and possibly travel forever. So Carl Sagan, the scientist and science fiction writer, thought we've got to put a message in a bottle on these spacecraft, because what if aliens find them one day, and what would we send? And so this beautiful creative project was put together with no budget in a few months, and they ended up making a golden record on each spacecraft, on which they put images of Earth, sounds of Earth, a recorded greeting from President Jimmy Carter and the head of the UN, and 90 minutes of music. And they put Chuck Berry on there, Blind Willie Johnson, a really eclectic mix of music from around the globe, and Beethoven's Fifth, which was recorded by the Philharmonia Orchestra back in 1968. So the Philharmonia Orchestra is out in deep space, and it's still traveling. It's 13 billion miles away now. Mahler's Third, which we're premiering today, is actually, in a way, a very simple film. We're just trying to capture the live energy of being at the heart of the Philharmonia Orchestra when it's performing at full strength upstairs in the Royal Festival Hall where we're based, with our principal conductor, Esa-Pekka Salonen, conducting. So you're right there in front of him and you hear the audio through the speakers. So it's a really physical experience. And that's a really important piece for the orchestra, because that was the first piece of music that Esa-Pekka Salonen conducted with the Philharmonia back in 1983, when he was a young, fresh-faced conductor in his 20s, still in Finland. He filled in at the last minute for Michael Tilson Thomas. He had 3 days' notice. He'd never read the score. He'd never heard it before in his life, but he conducted it, and it was a sensational performance, and it really changed his career overnight. Well, I think as I said before, I think what's really nice is it changes audiences' preconceptions of orchestral music. So I think if you've never seen an orchestra before, you think it's quite boring and not for you, and I think it changes your view. But actually, classical music fans respond the most emotionally, because if you know Mahler and if you know the Philharmonia and you know Esa-Pekka, you've almost certainly never sat there and actually been conducted and can see his face as he's conducting the whole piece and watch all the players. So actually the most emotional reaction is from classical audiences. They were the ones I was most nervous about, because particularly with regards to the audio and the fidelity of what we're trying to do, and this is still a really new technology. So we're still learning as we go, but that actually we've had the most emotional response from classical fans. There is a often legitimate skepticism about new technologies and that it's going to be a gimmick, and I think there still is a lot of skepticism about VR, but I think that there is something really interesting in this medium for orchestral music, and I think the only way to really test that is to show it to audiences and they'll tell you what they think. People are pretty straightforward. You can read it quite quickly if they like it or not. And overwhelmingly, we've had really positive responses to the VR.